Today's episode of SBJ I Factor is sponsored by Pepsi. I'm Abe Madcore with Sports Business Journal. One of the most influential business leaders in esports is Whalen Rozelle, who is currently Senior Director of Global Esports at Riot Games. Whalen Rozelle joined Riot Games in 2012 and was a member of SBJ's 40 Under 40 class in 2019. Hey, Whalen, it's great to see you. It's been too long now. You were the 40 Under 40 class of 2019, so a relatively new honoree. I know you were born in Ithaca, New York. I know you went to Stanford. After college, you had a couple of spots at Cornerstone Research. You were at Google for a year or so, joined Riot Games in 2013, where you've continued to take on more and more responsibility. But before we begin about your story, I got to ask, I love the last name, of course. I've joked with you before. And of course, you're related to the late, great champion of sports business, Pete Rozelle.
Yeah, Abe, it's wonderful to be here. And yeah, Pete's obviously the legend of the Rozelle family. We're all sort of aspiring to hit his highs. He was my grandfather's cousin. And I mean, we grew up, the Rozelles were a football family, right? Just always watching football. I had the great fortune of attending a couple Super Bowls because of Pete's generosity. I got to see Michael Jackson perform at the Rose Bowl. That was wonderful. So it's definitely a legacy that, you know, we just try to live up to, because I think that he really saw the future when it came to the NFL and what it could be, and just trying to channel a little bit of that every day at Riot.
Oh, what an amazing, amazing individual. So let's start with you and your background. I know you were the son of an educator, so you moved around a lot. Like I said, born in upstate New York, but moved around, had a few stops.
Yeah, moved around a bunch. The life of an assistant professor. We lived in Beijing, Taiwan, but ultimately settled back down in the Bay Area when my parents settled in at Stanford, and I had the great fortune of growing up in just like the Bay Area is a wonderful place to have a childhood, and rode bikes everywhere. It was just a wonderful thing. It's just a diverse community of, again, educators, professionals, and this was pre-Silicon Valley. This is back when the Bay Area was just the San Francisco Bay Area. So, but I do remember, growing up on Stanford campus at Maples Pavilion, seeing the men's and women's basketball teams, and going to Candlestick. Man, that place was quite the dump, but it was just wonderful memories and so I just grew up a sports family, and sports was really just ever present in my life, and it was what we did, and it was how we had fun and bonded as a family.
Were you into gaming as a youth?
Yeah, that was always the tension, right? Where my parents were like, okay, how much video games will they let me play? But I basically was sports and video games. That was my childhood.
Okay.
And I would come home from practice and boot up the Super Nintendo and play that for hours. And then my mom would come in and say, hey, do your homework. And I'd do my homework and then get back on the machine. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like I've had a bit of success at Riot and in esports, is because it really is the intersection of my two passions in life, which is sports and video games.
Now, growing up, did you think you'd be in the sports business? Because I know you told us in 2019, your dream job or an interesting job for you would be a venture capitalist. But what did you aspire to be?
I aspired to be in sports. I mean, the dream job would be like running, like the GM of, I think growing up was like a GM of the 49ers, or the GM of the Giants was my dream job. By the way, still wonderful job for anyone. Actually, just kidding. But I think it evolved, right? I think understanding that my love of sports, and I could channel that and get a lot of what was really resonant with me intrinsically in this current world. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been at Riot for so long. I mean, it's been over 9 years at this point. And so it's just something that, if we're talking to anyone who's ever thinking about what to do next, I think there really is some truth to chasing your passion and trying to make your passion your profession. Because, I know myself when I was at Google or when I was at Cornerstone, these are wonderful places, and I got a lot of the core skills I use to this day, but I didn't bring my whole self, to the job. I wasn't so present and just all in. And I think that it does require that kind of intrinsic connection and resonance to just bring your whole self to work. And I think you see that with the best in whatever field they're in is that they're all in. It's not, there's no such thing as half measures there.
I love that. Bring your whole self to work. And you're obviously very good in the classroom. At Stanford, I believe you were a double major. Correct me if I'm right. I think it was econ and East Asian studies.
That's correct. Yeah.
So you did great at school. The plan after college was to do what?
That's that ever present question of just, hey, what do I do now that I've entered the real world? I mean, I had the fortune of I interned at Goldman and I did a little bit of consulting. I was really just trying to find my way. And so I actually just defaulted to, hey, what are some other people in the track that I was on happen to be doing, and try my hand at that. And I think that like the key term was just realizing like, hey, why am I trying to be what everyone else is trying to be, trying to walk the same path versus finding something where I'm like, oh no, this is what I really want to do. And that was at Google when I was in finance at Google working with some of the product teams, and I saw the product managers there like thinking about creating experiences for people, right? And trying to understand an audience and understand their needs and anticipate what they were looking for. They tell you what they want, but what do they really want? What can you give them that they didn't know that they wanted? And that really spoke to me. And so that was sort of my big career pivot, was leaving Google to switch from a finance sort of consulting track to a product track. And that was that bet where I was like, look, it sounds crazy. All my other friends are, bankers, consultants, and they're going to go off to business school. But I'm instead going to set out this because I love to do this. And it matters to me to serve these people, to serve the audience and the customer. And that's sort of what I spoke to, where it was like, I noticed myself being as all in on the challenges that were in front of me as I was when I'm like playing a game that I love, or if I'm at like at a sporting event. So I'm there fully. And I just found myself just being better and being more creative. And that I haven't looked back.
And so to that, at that time, Whalen, did you consider that almost one of your biggest career risks at that time? Because leaving finance is, yeah.
So certainly, I mean, I can speak to my mom's Chinese, and her proudest moment was being able to tell her friends. She finally understood what I did. She was like, "Oh, Whalen works at Google," and it was like she was so proud, and it was really tough to tell her like, "Oh, I'm gonna go make gaming websites, and I'm gonna go make this like esports thing," and it really was a risk, but in hindsight, it of course, like I don't see how I could. It's so formative to who I am now and what I do. But it was kind of crazy at the time, because this was back in the mid 2000s, 2007, 2008, when gaming was not yet a thing, right? Like right now, everyone plays Fortnite. People like see these esports events, and they understand like gaming's a legitimate thing, like going to the movies. It's a hobby like any other hobby. This was before then, when I still couldn't. I often didn't tell people that I played video games when I worked with them, because I wasn't sure how they would take it. So that was definitely a risk, but one that I'm really glad to have made and would make again 20 out of 10 times.
Any key mentors or influencers at this time, or were you making these decisions? It sounds like you were making these decisions really internally of following your passion.
Definitely, like it required introspection of like knowing yourself and taking the time to reflect on, am I happy? What motivates me, what gets me up in the morning. But there were a couple key people who were mentors. Like Daniel Romaine was just, she was a manager on my finance team. I think she's still at Google, like in some sort of high up role in the finance or consulting group. But she had that real talk with me where she's like, hey, you're super smart and you're not trying very hard. And it had to be it was like that real moment where you had to be told that there's so much more you could do. And that was the conversation that actually sort of led me to embark on that kind of self-reflection journey, to be like, well, I really should be looking to do something else. I should be finding something where I'm as passionate about as I am when I go home and play video games, or when I'm at a sporting event, like I said. And so that was probably the key conversation. I still remember the conference room that we were in. I still remember the feeling of like guilt and self-realization when, look, being told that you're failing or being told that you could do more, that's not something a lot of high performers hear, but it's something they need to hear. That was a really important conversation for me to have.
So Whalen, when you joined, I think it was 2013 when you joined Riot, was it an aha moment? Was it like you said, was that immediately you brought yourself to work every day, your best self, and were you really optimizing your performance?
Yeah, it was pretty quick. I mean,
Yeah.
The sort of, it's a switch that flicks on. I mean, early on in those days, it's actually 2012, but it was I think we averaged, I mean, I at least averaged maybe 100, 110 hours a week because we were so ambitious with what we wanted to do. I remember going home at 2 a.m. every day, coming into work at 10. But I also remember, I mean, I was physically exhausted at the end of that first year, but the aha moment was when we, like, 6 months in, we had done a bunch of preparation. We threw our first like world championship, a global event where we brought everyone to USC's Galen Center. And it was the opening ceremony where we had like a choir, like sing League of Legends music, but we also had like sporting moments from the event. And it was really that perfect blend of like League of Legends IP. And I've played 3,000 games of League at that point. So I was deep in it.
Yeah.
And then I was a sports fan and I'm like, wow, this is it. I was like, I had seen the rehearsal 3 or 4 times, but I was nearly brought to tears. And I'm like, this is exactly the type of energy and emotion and mix. How can we bottle this and just bring it to everyone, as many people, and do it over and over again? That was the moment where I'm like, this is a thing that I want to keep doing and make bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, we then went on and did Staples, and like we did a soccer stadium in Korea. We've done a bunch of big events, but that event was really when it hit home that how much it meant to me personally, and then how much it meant to all the fans who were trying to serve. Again, it's like, if you have that connection with the fans you're trying to serve. I mean, I'm way older than most of the people that we're trying to serve, like, but at the end of the day, we're looking for that same thing. It's that sense of belonging, that sense of like just hitting the thing that you value so much and being part of a collective. Most esports fans have this is the first time they're a fan of any kind of sport. And the most common thing I've heard is, I didn't understand my friends who liked sports until now. And that made me so happy as someone who grew up a sports fan, right? I'm like, oh, wow, we did it. We captured the essence of being a sports fan, but in a unique way for gamers. And so that was the moment right there.
Oh, plus, I mean, the result of those hours and hours of hard work, if you were putting 110, 120 hours per week into this, it must have been, I mean, talk about grinding through it and showing a lot of grit. That's an example.
You know, all credit to my wife, who was immensely patient during this time, where I moved her down to Los Angeles, and she loved the Bay too. And I think it's not something that, it's one thing you look back on, you're like, wow, those were the moments. We're in the trenches. We were right. Killing it. And but I think right now it's like, wow, if we did that, that would be a failure, right? That, like, it's how can we get the same results without having to put people through hell and back to get it? And so now it's a different benchmark of like, can we still be scrappy and creative and challenge convention without necessarily how can be smart as well, right? Because a lot of that stuff was us just finding our way and really compensating with time and effort instead of knowing what we know now and maybe being a little bit smarter about it.
Yeah, and so some of the people. So let's talk about how you've grown professionally and personally. Some of the people I've talked to about you, you know, the compliments they give you about your work style and your ability to listen and your ability to see around corners. Like, I know it's going to be hard for you because you're very humble, but like, when you bring your best self to work, what are the attributes that you're bringing that are really, in your mind, pretty special or unique? Not unique, but where you over-index at. What are you good at?
Sure. I would say that, I mean, if I look at the history of feedback that I've been given, probably the most consistent thing that I try to bring, and something I'm deliberately leaning into, is trying to understand the audience that we're trying to serve, and then trying to see the future in some ways. I think you said see around corners. That's really well put. And trying to marry the two into a product offering or a vision or a plan or a strategy that can surprise and delight the audience. And initially it was my ideas that was getting us there. And more now I'm trying to create a team with like a diverse set of skills and backgrounds that they can pull from different places and experiences that could be a melting pot of ideas. And how instead of injecting my own ideas, being like, hey, I've got the right ideas, how do I foster an environment where people can afford to take risks and throw out crazy stuff that elsewhere they might be ridiculed for being crazy, but we can say, hey, that's an awesome idea. Here's it sparks this idea. How can we spark that? And so facilitating those conversations is a dramatically different skill than bringing the ideas themselves. And early on in my career, I was sort of rewarded and lauded for bringing the ideas. And now I think I've been able, through lots of trial and error, to learn how to now get the right team and put them in a position where those ideas can germinate and really take root. So that's what I'd say is kind of like the superpower that I try to bring to work every day. And when I'm successful, we get something wild and new and different and innovative, right, and groundbreaking. And that's really what I try to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. Great idea. And we can do this. So added it to it. I know we're all working on ourselves all the time. What do you need to do better? What can you work on?
I think a thing that I learned too late, and one thing I'm trying to do now, is just like invest more in myself. It sounds incredibly selfish, but ultimately there's a rhyme and reason to this, where bringing your best self and doing what we just talked about is incredibly intense. It requires this emotional connection with the team, this EQ that's really draining, quite frankly. And it honestly just requires optimism and belief and the ability to bring that energy so that everyone else feeds off of it. It's very draining. And so I did not invest in myself enough early on, both taking time away, unplugging, sleeping. Something as crazy as just getting 7-8 hours of sleep a day. Like, I don't do that. My wife is wonderful. She tells me that I need to do that more, and she's right. And I think that I would be able to be my best and be more consistent in that manner should I invest in myself. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get out of this basement that I'm in every day for the for the whole pandemic, take walks, really just find time where I'm not working, but really it's just allowing myself to mentally decompress and again, just bring my best stuff for the team. Because otherwise, it's a fine line between fostering creativity and in some cases having to push the conversation forward and then sort of overruling people and dampening creativity. It's a really tough line to walk. And so you have to be operating at 100% capacity. So that's what I'm trying to invest in myself now. It's a process, right? Like as a gamer who stayed up till 2 or 3 a.m. and now I've got 2 young kids that wake me up at 7, there's trade-offs, man, right? There's trade-offs, Dave. You got to make them. And so I think that learning how to be more responsible for myself is the big thing.
And you talked about putting together teams. You talked about the energy that you try to bring every day. It's probably the same energy you look for in some of your team. How do you hire? What attributes are you looking for when you bring on people?
I'd say I've thought about this a bit. I mean, I just over time, because really that's the secret, right? I mean, no amount of leadership is going to work unless you have the horses, if you have the people who are really the true geniuses behind things and harnessing that creativity. So I think the first thing is character, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have ups and downs. We'll have wins, but we're going to have a ton of losses too. And so who do you want in the trenches with you when you're losing? That connection. And that's just something it's hard to know. It's like, is it character? Is it a communication style? Like, you really need to be okay with losing with an individual. I try to think about that. You play to win, but you want to have a team where you can be in the trenches together. I'd say,
but that's tough, Whalen, because trying to spot character in an interview and even over a dinner, it's really, really a challenge, isn't it? Yeah.
It's hard. And unfortunately, it's also an imprecise science. There's not scientific. You're just looking for people who who communicate, like the signs are like who communicates well, like what are their values and background, and are, at least are they roughly similar. I think you want your backgrounds to be diverse and different, but you want your values and your character and your communication to be consistent and high. And so I think I just mentioned a diversity of background experiences. I feel like there's been a lot of studies where if you have a diverse team that's managed well, they're far more effective and efficient than if you have a group of people with the same background and experience, no matter how well or poorly you manage them. And so that really is something that we strive for at Riot. And so, I mean, if you look at the Valorant team, there are a lot of people we hired new to Riot. So if you look at Castro DeFrutti, comes from Activision Blizzard, more of a consultant background, super sharp guy. Alex Francois joined us from the NFL. David Mulhall joined us from the NBA for business development, and they all have different backgrounds and experiences that we can pull from to think differently, right? And so that's really important. And then lastly, just horsepower, mental acuity. Like I think creativity is about taking things that currently exist and combining them in new and different ways in service of something that hasn't been done before. And so I do think that when you're trying to live on that creative edge, you want people who are generically smart. I don't think you're looking for like, oh, this person's done this for 20 years. Like that might be valuable if you're trying to do that same thing for the next 20 years. But if you're looking to do something different and challenge convention, oftentimes you want people who can think on their feet, who can be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And when we're throwing constraints at people, whether it's like, let's say, putting on an esports event in Iceland during a global pandemic with limited budget, what can result of that? And oftentimes that's where the magic happens, right? That's where people get so creative. We're like, okay, creativity breeds constraints breed creativity. Oftentimes that's really when we've done our best work. I think our Valorant event that just happened in Iceland was a great example of that, where we had to get it done in 7 days instead of 14 or to 14 plus usually when we have an event. And so like that really forced a bunch of constraints around the number of teams, the format, the way we covered it, and ultimately really quite proud of like the results of that. And that's what I personally live for and get up for to work, is disrupting the work that we did for the past 9 years, is doing something new there.
So many things there that you have right, and but there's so many challenges there. As we finish up, you talked a little bit about the importance of getting away from it all. You talked a little bit about like if you knew then what you know now, some of the things you do differently. Before I ask you about some of your advice to young people, let's have a little fun. So is there anything that, as you're staying up late outside of gaming, that maybe you and your wife are binge watching or binge reading, or any other parts of your lifestyle that you're really invested in right now? I know the Peloton. I'm sure the Peloton's one.
Yeah. The Peloton's one. I think one thing that we've been doing a lot, which has been a fun family activity, is baking with our daughter. She's 3.5, and she loves to help bake and mix. And so my wife and I have been like binging on the Great British Baking Show on Netflix, and just like lots of things to just try to, again, it's about, I think unplugging is just like finding fun things to do that are just not even remotely related to your everyday life. And so we've been doing a lot of just like stuff in the kitchen with our kids, and then watching cooking and baking shows together, and reading a lot. And I wish I was the type of person that could read all the business books and really like pull all those learnings in. And it's never clicked for me. So I just love reading for pleasure, and again, just like escapism from that, to let my brain decompress. And so like doing a lot of reading when I can, get away from a screen, like get a physical book in your hand. These are the things that I find to be quite relaxing.
What have you been reading recently specifically that you'd like to pass along?
So for any sci-fi fantasy fans out there, Brandon Sanderson, my favorite author by a country mile, he has a new entry to his Way of Kings series. They're epic fantasy, it's thousands of pages long. It's just wonderfully evocative, and I think it sparks the imagination that I had as a child growing up, and that really is just so refreshing. So don't read what other people are telling you to read. Read the thing that is what you need, and know it's just about knowing yourself. And so I stick to my sci-fi fantasy.
before I get to what's next for Whalen Rozelle and your advice to young people, got to ask as well, you're a Bay Area sports fan, so you're still bullish on your Warriors and your 49ers and the Giants?
I think it's a wonderful time to be a Bay Area sports fan because, look, I still maintain that the first year of the KD Warriors is the greatest team of all time. I understand Bulls fans, 96, 97 Bulls will want to fight me.
Yep,
I was a Michael Jordan fan too. Don't get me wrong, but that was basketball at its peak. It's fun to be the underdogs again. The Giants are doing incredibly well. I just think that whole front office has reinvented itself. I love the aggressiveness to trade for Trey Lance with the Niners, and Steph Curry coming off. I think he's he was third place MVP, just a wonderful season. And I think we've got I think it's actually a wonderful time because we're not the top dog in any of our sports, but we're sort of lurking right behind there, and we're sort of the hunters again. And it's fun to be in that position. And so kudos to all the organizations that are really reinventing themselves in the Bay. It's fun to watch from down here, and it's something that I'm just eager to get back into stadiums, right? Yeah. Like that's the thing where it's like gathering together again. I do believe this concept of the new Roaring 20s is about to happen because after being cooped up inside for over a year, I'm ready to get back and enjoy sports in person.
Well, I love that. And a lot of narrative and a lot of storylines around your Bay Area sports team. So last two questions quickly as we finish up, Whalen. I know you get this a lot from young people, from their parents. How do they get involved in the sports business? How do they get involved in the esports business? What's your advice to young people who want to be the next Whalen Rozelle?
So first off, don't try to be me. Be yourself. I think that's the key. I've said know thyself a few times this discussion, and I think that's key. Esports is actually somewhat unique in that it is still somewhat grassroots. It's still inventing itself as an industry. And I think there's many opportunities to signal your creativity and your interest through working through community events, volunteering if you're on a college campus. There's a lot of esports clubs. Really just find a way to do the thing as best as you can, right? And I think that's one advantage of esports is that you can do the thing and signal your interest in some degree. And I think that people look for that kind of scrappiness and entrepreneurialism. And I think that that's something that would strongly recommend is like, don't wait to let someone else give you a shot. Take your shot as best as you can. And if you truly love it, that journey itself will be worth the reward, and who knows what can happen from there.
Interesting. And what's next as we sit here in June of 2021 for Whalen Rozelle?
Well, I mean, we're building the next big esport with Valorant. I think that we've burst on the scene with our Iceland event. I think we had over 1 million peak viewers, and that's something that I think puts us in the third largest PC esport behind League of Legends. And I think that we're just gonna continue to disrupt. I think that when it comes down to it, the first 7-8 years of my life with League of Legends was trying to bring the sports experience to esports. And it was a lot of learning and pulling from all of the heroes and entrepreneurs and visionaries from the sporting world that I've admired and we've admired, and pulling that into video games. I think esports, it's time to forge our own path and understand where we are different and what advantages that brings. And so I know that's somewhat hand wavy, but really that's the space that we want to play in. How can it feel more like the cutting edge between sports and entertainment, and where can we push the envelope? And hopefully, my dream is for sports to look at esports and some things we're able to do and bring some of that into the sporting world, because we've borrowed so much from sports. We'd love to give back.
It's a fun canvas you're working on, and you continue to innovate, and it's very exciting to see. And so for Whalen Rozelle, who is a Sports Business Journal's 40 under 40 honoree in 2019, keep innovating, keep leading, and thanks a lot for joining us on SBJ I Factor. And remember to continue to take that time for yourself to be the leader that you are. So great seeing you. Take care of yourself. We'll see you soon down the road, my friend.
Thanks, Dave. It's wonderful to talk to you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining SBJ I Factor today. Remember to subscribe to SBJ I Factor wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to our future episodes that will hit every 2 weeks.